mentor who turned against his own protege, nobody expected Victor Wembanyama's harshest criticism to come from someone he once respected. But after the San Antonio Spurs reached the NBA Finals, Kevin Garnett changed the entire conversation. Wembanyama had just survived a brutal Game 7, eliminated the defending champions, and carried one of the NBA's youngest teams to the biggest stage in basketball. When the final buzzer sounded, the emotion hit him all at once. He cried. The cameras caught it. The hugs, the tears, the relief, and the weight of a dream suddenly becoming real. Millions of fans saw passion. Garnett saw something different. On his podcast, KG said the emotions came too early. He argued that Wembanyama still had 4 more wins to chase before letting everything out. Then he went even further. He picked the New York Knicks to beat the Spurs. Not because Wemby lacked talent, but because Garnett believed the young star still needed to feel real championship pain before becoming truly ready. That instantly split the NBA world. Was this tough love from a legend? Or did Garnett cross the line by publicly doubting a player he once mentored? That question turned Wembanyama's tears into something much bigger than a post-game moment. It became old school versus new school, control versus emotion, toughness versus authenticity. And now, with the finals ahead, Wembanyama has one chance to answer KG without saying a word, by winning. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe for more NBA news and drama. Tell us where you're watching from today. Comment 1 if you think Garnett was right. Comment 2 if you think Wembanyama's tears showed passion, not weakness. The tears that divided the NBA. Before Kevin Garnett ever criticized Victor Wembanyama, there was a moment that stopped the entire basketball world. Game 7. On the road against the defending champions, with a trip to the NBA Finals on the line. The Oklahoma City Thunder had spent the entire season looking nearly unbeatable. They were experienced, disciplined, and battle-tested. Most analysts expected them to survive the series and continue their championship defense. The Spurs had other plans. What followed was a war. Every possession felt heavier than the last. Every mistake carried enormous consequences. The pressure inside the arena was impossible to ignore. For a young San Antonio team, this was the biggest challenge they had ever faced. And for Victor Wembanyama, it was the biggest game of his life. The Thunder kept fighting back. Every time the Spurs created separation, Oklahoma City answered. Every time San Antonio appeared ready to take control, the defending champions pushed right back. Nothing came easy. Nothing was guaranteed. At several points, it felt like the Spurs were only one mistake away from watching their season disappear. Yet somehow they survived. Wembanyama wasn't perfect. He faced foul trouble. He battled constant defensive attention. He felt the pressure of carrying a franchise that suddenly believed it could accomplish the impossible. But when San Antonio needed leadership, he delivered it. The young star helped keep the Spurs composed while chaos unfolded around them. Then the final buzzer sounded. The Spurs had done it. The defending champions were gone. The NBA Finals were next. For many veterans, that moment might have been celebrated with a smile or a fist pump. For Wembanyama, it was different. Years of sacrifice flooded into one overwhelming emotional release. The expectation, the criticism, the pressure of being called the future of basketball before he was even old enough to legally rent a car in some states. Everything came crashing down at once. He hugged teammates. He stood frozen in disbelief. And then the tears came, not because the job was finished, but because he knew how difficult the journey had been just to reach this point. Millions of fans watched the scene and saw something genuine. A superstar who wasn't pretending to be emotionless. A competitor who cared so deeply about winning that he couldn't hide what the moment meant. Yet others viewed it differently. Some believed champions should remain focused until the trophy is won. Some argued that celebrating a conference title was premature. And that disagreement is exactly why the video spread across social media like wildfire. Within hours, sports shows, podcasts, former players, and fans were debating the same question. Were these the tears of a future champion, or the emotions of someone not yet ready for the biggest stage? Nobody knew it yet, but Kevin Garnett was about to enter the conversation. And when he did, the debate would explode into one of the most talked about NBA stories of the year. KG goes public. At first, the video looked like just another emotional playoff moment. A young superstar crying after reaching the NBA final. The internet talked about it, fans debated it, analysts shared their opinions. Then Kevin Garnett poured gasoline on the fire. During a podcast appearance, the Hall of Famer didn't simply question Wembanyama's reaction. He challenged the entire mindset behind it. Garnett argued that the Spurs hadn't accomplished the ultimate goal yet. In his eyes, celebrating too much after winning the Western Conference was dangerous. The championship was still 4 victories away, but what shocked people wasn't the criticism itself, it was who the criticism was aimed at. This wasn't some anonymous player. This wasn't a veteran rival. This was Victor Wembanyama, the player Garnett had personally spent time with months earlier. The player many believe Garnett respected. The player who had actively sought out Garnett's wisdom. That history made every word hit harder. Then came the prediction. Garnett boldly declared that the New York Knicks would win the NBA final. Not in 7 games, not after an epic battle. In 6, the statement instantly exploded across social media. Fans couldn't believe what they were hearing. Why would a mentor publicly pick against someone he had helped guide? Why would a former champion question a player who had just accomplished something extraordinary? Some people defended Garnett. They argued that greatness requires uncomfortable truths, that real mentors don't tell you what you want to hear. They tell you what you need to hear. Others weren't buying it. To them, the timing felt wrong. Wembanyama wasn't acting satisfied. He wasn't claiming the mission was complete. He wasn't celebrating a championship. He was simply overwhelmed by one of the biggest moments of his life. The debate quickly became bigger than basketball. It turned into a conversation about leadership, about mentorship, about whether public criticism helps or hurts young stars. And while everyone was arguing about Garnett's comments, very few people stopped to ask an important question. Why did Garnett feel so strongly about this in the first place? The answer wasn't found in a podcast. It wasn't found in a post-game interview. It was hidden in a relationship that most fans knew very little about. Because months before the criticism, before the tears, before the finals run, Kevin Garnett and Victor Wembanyama had spent hours together. And what happened during that meeting would make Garnett's comments even more surprising. The story actually began long before Game 7, long before the camera, long before the controversy. It started on a football field during the summer, a place where a Hall of Famer came expecting one thing, and left believing he had just met the future of the NBA. When the mentor believed, before Kevin Garnett questioned Victor Wembanyama, he respected him. Months before the playoff drama, Wembanyama reached out to Garnett for one reason: knowledge. Not attention, not cameras, not headlines. He wanted to learn from one of the fiercest competitors in NBA history. At first, Garnett wasn't sure what to expect. His history with San Antonio was intense, and he knew Spurs fans never saw him as a friendly figure. But once he met Wembanyama, everything changed. Garnett quickly realized this wasn't a normal young star. Wemby wasn't trying to impress him. He wasn't chasing validation. He was listening, studying, absorbing everything. That impressed Garnett more than any highlight ever could. What stood out wasn't just Wembanyama's size or talent. It was his calmness, his discipline, his ability to process information like someone far older than his age. Garnett brought fire. Wembanyama brought silence. Garnett brought intensity. Wembanyama brought control. And somehow, the contrast worked. They talked about basketball, leadership, pressure, toughness, and what it really takes to become a champion. By the end of that meeting, Garnett seemed convinced Wembanyama had something rare, not just physical gifts, a championship mind. That is what makes the later criticism so shocking. Because this wasn't a stranger doubting Wemby, this was a mentor who had already seen his work ethic up close. So when Garnett later questioned his emotions and picked the Knicks to beat the Spurs, the NBA world had to ask, did Garnett see a weakness? Or did he misunderstand the same passion he once admired? The answer may be hidden in Wembanyama's unusual offseason journey, the obsession with greatness. Most NBA players spend their offseason recovering. Some work on their jump shot, some add muscle, some take vacations before preparing for another long season. Victor Wembanyama chose a completely different path. He went searching for greatness. Not the kind found in highlight reels or endorsement deal. The kind hidden inside discipline, sacrifice, and relentless self-improvement. While much of the basketball world was relaxing, Wembanyama traveled halfway across the globe to China. His destination wasn't a luxury training facility. It wasn't a private gym filled with NBA trainers. It was a Shaolin temple. For weeks, Wembanyama immersed himself in an environment built around mental and physical control. Early mornings, meditation, breathing exercises, endless repetition, daily routines designed to strengthen focus as much as the body. To many people, it sounded unusual. To Wembanyama, it was necessary. He understood something that most young athletes never fully grasp. Physical talent can make you special. Mental discipline can make you legendary. But the Shaolin Temple was only one stop on his journey. After returning from China, Wembanyama continued searching for knowledge. He sought out Hall of Famers. Champion. players who had already climbed the mountain he was trying to reach. One of them was Hakeem Olajuwon, one of the greatest centers the game has ever seen. Another was Kevin Garnett, a former MVP whose intensity became part of NBA history. Think about what that says about Wembanyama. Most young stars believe they already have the answers. Wembanyama kept asking questions. Most young stars want praise. Wembanyama wanted criticism. Most young stars focus on what they already do well. Wembanyama focused on what he still needed to learn. That's what impressed Garnett so much. He wasn't looking at a player satisfied with being the future. He was looking at someone obsessed with becoming the best. Every workout had a purpose. Every conversation had a purpose. Every lesson had a purpose. The mission wasn't fame. The mission wasn't popularity. The mission was winning. And as the season progressed, the results became impossible to ignore. Wembanyama wasn't just improving, he was evolving. His confidence grew. His leadership grew. His impact on both ends of the floor grew. The Spurs began transforming from an exciting young team into a legitimate contender. Slowly, the impossible started feeling possible. But greatness is never earned in the offseason. It's tested under pressure. And that test was waiting in the Western Conference Finals. Because standing between Wembanyama and the NBA Finals was the most dominant team in the conference. The defending champions, a team that many believed was simply too experienced, too talented, and too battle-tested to lose, the Oklahoma City Thunder. And soon, Wembanyama would discover whether all that preparation had truly prepared him for the biggest challenge of his life. Down 3-2, the Oklahoma City Thunder were not supposed to fall. They were the defending champion. They had the confidence, they had the experience, they had the home crowd ready to explode. And for most of the Western Conference Finals, they looked exactly like the team everyone feared. The Spurs were young, dangerously young. They had talent. But talent alone doesn't survive playoff pressure. Talent alone doesn't win on the road. Talent alone doesn't stand firm when a champion starts throwing punches. And after 5 games, San Antonio was in trouble. Down 3-2, one loss away from elimination, one bad night away from watching the Thunder return to the final. This was the moment where young teams usually break, the moment where mistakes multiply, the moment where the lights become too bright. But Wembanyama didn't disappear. He had already spent the entire season preparing for moments like this. The discipline, the training, the mentors, the pressure, the criticism, all of it had led here. And now, there was no place to hide. Oklahoma City wanted to prove the Spurs weren't ready. The basketball world wanted to see if Wemby could carry a team when the season was hanging by a thread. And Kevin Garnett's later criticism would make this stretch even more important. Because if Wembanyama was truly too emotional, this was where he should have collapsed. But he didn't. He responded with focus. The Spurs fought back. They refused to let the series end quietly. Every possession became a test of maturity. Every defensive stop felt like survival. Every shot carried the weight of an entire franchise trying to return to glory. San Antonio wasn't just playing for a win. They were fighting for belief. Belief that their young core was ahead of schedule. Belief that Wembanyama wasn't just a future superstar. Belief that the future had already arrived. And when the Spurs forced Game 7, the pressure shifted. Suddenly, Oklahoma City had something to lose. Suddenly, the defending champions had to protect their throne. Suddenly, Wembanyama had one game to change everything. Game 7 would not just decide a series. It would decide the story. Was San Antonio too young? Was Wembanyama ready? Were the tears that came later a sign of weakness? Or were they the release of a player who had survived the fire? The answer was waiting in Oklahoma City. And the entire NBA was about to watch. Surviving Game 7, everything came down to one night, one game. 48 minutes separating the Spurs from elimination or immortality. The atmosphere inside Oklahoma City was electric. Thunder fans could sense another finals appearance. The defending champions were on their home floor with everything in front of them, and for a while, it looked like they might get it. But the Spurs refused to panic. They came out aggressive, focused, determined. Every player seemed to understand what was at stake. This wasn't just another playoff game. This was a chance to change the future of the franchise. Early on, San Antonio grabbed momentum and built a lead. Yet nobody believed the Thunder would go away quietly. Champions never do. Every time the Spurs appeared ready to pull away, Oklahoma City responded. The crowd roared. The pressure increased. The intensity reached another level. Then things became even more difficult for San Antonio. Victor Wembanyama found himself dealing with foul trouble. Suddenly, the player the Spurs depended on most couldn't play with complete freedom. Every defensive possession became dangerous. Every whistle felt massive. Every mistake could change the season. For a young player, this is often where panic begins, but Wembanyama stayed composed. He trusted his teammates, and his teammates responded. One by one, they stepped up. The Spurs didn't collapse. They didn't lose confidence. They didn't look like a young team playing in the biggest game of their lives. They looked like a group that genuinely believed they belonged. Meanwhile, The Thunder kept attacking. Every run felt like it could be the one that finally broke San Antonio. The lead shrank, the crowd got louder, momentum shifted back and forth. The pressure became unbearable. Then came the final minutes. The season hanging by a thread. Every possession mattered, every rebound mattered, every defensive stop mattered. And somehow, despite all the chaos, despite all the pressure, despite their youth and inexperience, the Spurs held firm. When Oklahoma City made a push, San Antonio answered. When doubt appeared, somebody made a play. When the Thunder threatened to take control, the Spurs refused to surrender it. Then it happened. The final buzzer sounded, game over, series over, the defending champions were gone. The San Antonio Spurs were going to the NBA Final. For the first time in years, the franchise was back on basketball's biggest stage. Players celebrated, fans celebrated, the entire organization celebrated. And standing in the center of it all was Victor Wembanyama, a two-year-old superstar who had just helped lead one of the youngest teams in basketball through a 7-game war. What happened next would become one of the most talked about moments of the entire postseason, because while everyone else saw a victory, Wembanyama felt something much deeper. And those emotions were about to create a controversy that nobody saw coming. Why Wemby cried. After the final buzzer, Victor Wembanyama did not celebrate like a player who believed the mission was complete. He did not act satisfied. He did not speak like someone who had already reached the top. He cried because the weight of the moment finally became real. For years, Wembanyama had carried impossible expectations. Before he played his first NBA game, people were already calling him the future of basketball. Every mistake was analyzed, every highlight was replayed, every weakness was questioned, and now, after all that pressure, he was standing 4 wins away from the dream every player chases, the NBA championship. That is why the tears mattered. They were not a sign of weakness. They were not a sign of fear. They were the release of a competitor who wanted everything. When reporters asked him about the emotion, Wembanyama did not hide from the question. He explained that too many athletes feel forced to act a certain way. They feel pressure to look cold, silent, and untouchable. But he refused to carry that burden. He refused to pretend. He refused to hide what winning meant to him. That answer made the controversy even bigger, because Wembanyama was not apologizing. He was not backing down. He was telling the world that emotion and toughness can exist at the same time. That is what Kevin Garnett seemed to challenge. To Garnett, the finals were not the time to release emotion. They were the time to stay locked in, to keep everything inside, to understand that the job was not finished. But Wembanyama saw it differently. He was not crying because he thought the job was finished. He was crying because he understood how close he was to the job that truly mattered. There is a difference, and that difference changed the entire debate. Suddenly, this was no longer just about one player crying after one game. It was about what fans expect from athletes. It was about whether young stars are allowed to be human. It was about whether passion has to look angry in order to be respected. Wembanyama's teammates understood him. They knew how badly he wanted to win. They knew those tears came from hunger, not comfort. And that may be the part Garnett underestimated. Because the most dangerous version of Wembanyama might not be the emotionless one. It might be the one who feels everything, remembers everything, and then walks onto the court with something to prove. Now, the entire NBA had a question to answer. Was Kevin Garnett exposing a weakness, or had he just given Wembanyama the fuel he needed? Old school versus new school. By now, the conversation had become much bigger than basketball. It wasn't just about Victor Wembanyama. It wasn't just about Kevin Garnett. It was about two completely different views of what greatness looks like. For decades, players were taught that emotions should stay hidden. The old school mentality was simple: stay tough. Stay focused. Never let anyone see vulnerability. Champions were expected to project strength at all times, no matter what they were feeling inside. Kevin Garnett came from that era, an era built on intimidation, intensity, mental warfare, an era where showing emotion was often viewed as giving opponents an advantage. But the NBA has changed. Athletes today are more open than ever before. They talk about pressure. They talk about mental health. They talk about fear, doubt, and expectations. And many fans appreciate that honesty. Victor Wembanyama represents that new generation. A generation that doesn't believe strength comes from hiding emotion. A generation that believes strength comes from accepting them. That difference is why Garnett's comments exploded across social media. Fans immediately took sides. Some agreed with Garnett. They argued that championships require emotional control and complete focus. They believed the tears sent the wrong message before the finals had even begun. Others completely disagreed. They pointed out that Wembanyama wasn't celebrating a title. He wasn't acting satisfied. He wasn't declaring victory. He was reacting to one of the most emotional moments of his life. The debate spread everywhere. Sports shows, podcasts, Section. Former players, current players, everyone seemed to have an opinion, but there was one voice that mattered more than all the others. Wembanyama's teammate. The people who saw his work every day, the people who understood the sacrifices nobody else witnessed. They didn't see weakness, they saw commitment. They saw a player obsessed with winning, a player who demanded greatness from himself, a player who carried enormous expectations without running from them. And perhaps that was the biggest misunderstanding of all. Because people often confuse emotion with soft, but sometimes emotion comes from caring more than anyone else. Sometimes the people who feel the deepest are the people willing to sacrifice the most. And that's what made this story so fascinating. Neither side believed they were wrong. Garnett genuinely believed he was teaching a lesson. Wembanyama genuinely believed he had nothing to apologize for. Two competitors, two generations, two definitions of toughness. Now there was only one thing left to settle the argument. The NBA Finals. No more debates, no more podcasts, no more social media arguments. Just basketball. And on the biggest stage in the world, Victor Wembanyama would finally get the opportunity to answer every question. Not with words, but with his game, prove them wrong. In the end, this story was never really about tears. It was never just about Kevin Garnett, and it was never simply about one post-game moment that went viral across the internet. This story was about belief. The belief a young superstar had in himself, the belief a franchise had in its future, and the belief that greatness doesn't always look the way people expect it to. Now, everything comes down to the NBA Final. The San Antonio Spurs stand 4 wins away from completing one of the most remarkable journeys in recent memory. A team that many consider too young, too inexperienced, and too early in its development has fought its way onto basketball's biggest stage. Standing at the center of it all is Victor Wembanyama, a player who spent his offseason searching for wisdom across the world, a player who trained relentlessly while others rested, a player who embraced pressure instead of running from it, and a player who now finds himself carrying the expectations of an entire franchise. Across the court stands the New York Knicks, a hungry team chasing its own piece of history, a team determined to end decades of waiting, a team that believes this is finally its moment. The challenge could not be bigger, the pressure could not be greater, and the spotlight could not shine any brighter. Meanwhile, Kevin Garnett has already made his prediction. He believes the Knicks will win. He believes Wembanyama still has lessons left to learn. He believes championship pain is part of the process. Maybe he's right. Championship basketball has humbled many great players before. The finals expose weaknesses. They punish mistakes. They test every part of a player's character, but there is another possibility. Maybe the emotion Garnett criticized is actually Wembanyama's greatest strength. Maybe those tears were never a sign of weakness. Maybe they were proof of how deeply he cares, how fiercely he competes, how desperately he wants to achieve something special. Because history is filled with athletes who were told they weren't ready, athletes who were doubted, athletes who were underestimated, and many of them responded the same way. Not with arguments, not with excuses, not with social media posts. They responded with result. That is exactly what makes the next chapter of Wembanyama's story so compelling. The debate is over. The talking is over. The predictions are over. Now comes the only thing that mattered, the game. Whether the Spurs win or lose, one lesson has already become clear. Greatness is not about pretending to be emotion. Greatness is not about fitting into someone else's definition of toughness. Greatness is having the courage to be yourself while chasing the highest level of success. Victor Wembanyama has chosen his path. Kevin Garnett has chosen his position. And now, basketball will decide the rest. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with other NBA fans. And before you go, tell us your prediction in the comments. Comment 1 if you think the Spurs will win the NBA Final. Comment 2 if you think the Knicks will win the NBA Finals. No matter where you're watching from around the world, thank you for being part of the conversation. We'll see you in the next one.